Hello, welcome to this video on our YouTube channel. It's the first one I've actually made which isn't just me doing a webinar, which is brand new, so welcome. If you're not already liked and subscribed, obviously you have to do that because this is YouTube, and the three of you that have already subscribed, myself included, great job. In this video I wanted to talk around attack surface intelligence and what I really mean by that, and how you and your business could potentially understand where your attack surface is, what that really means, and how you can detect things, and how we can help you to understand it and make sense of it, and hopefully stop people from getting inside your computer networks. So let's have a look at some graphics and things and get right to it. Right, so the first thing I want to talk about here is a blog post that we put out not too long ago, which kind of really talks around our methodology for attack surface intelligence. I think it's a really great starting point. It really helps us kind of put things into perspective, understand the nuances of what I mean when I say attack surface intelligence. I don't just mean things like attack surface reduction, attack surface management, vulnerability management. These are all important parts, but they are part of a bigger whole, and the attack surface goes beyond those sorts of things that your technology stack probably does a reasonable job of detecting, but we have to go beyond and look for things that we can't necessarily see or that a machine can't necessarily interpret. We need some human-led analysis is where I'm getting to. So this blog post, it's quite a fairly long read I think for a blog post, but we're going to talk around like the basics of what I mean by that, so going beyond the network. And one of the things we really look for with this thing is stolen credentials. So data breaches, information stealer, malware logs. If your organization allows something like bring your own device, that is a really big risk for information stealing malware if you have employees that don't necessarily understand security all that well, and they do things like download pirated software, go on questionable content websites, things like that. If they are not very aware when it comes to phishing emails, that's also something we need to be aware of. It's these sorts of things where, because they've logged into a browser and save all their passwords there, if they're infected by something like an information stealer and then they log into the browser on their work device, even though the two things are completely separated, there's still a risk to your business, because the information stealer malware will steal all those credentials, and then you can go somewhere like the Russian market on the dark web and you can search for it, and you can pay as little as $10 or less and buy credentials for that website. And as soon as you buy those credentials, they no longer get offered out. So a cybercriminal can harvest these and collect these and try them and see if they work, and if they don't, they can wait for the next set, and so on and so forth. And it's this kind of threat that people need to get their head around and understand. When we talk about data breaches and we talk about historic information, that's one thing, right? So that's a point in time where your usernames, your passwords, your email address may have been in a data set that has been stolen and now becomes available in the public domain. That's something I think a lot of businesses and a lot of individuals kind of understand. But when we talk about this malware threat, people don't get it. It's not a case of being able to just reset your password and everything's happy, the jobs are good, let's move on. Because as soon as you then log into that account again, the information stealer will just do what it's continuing to do, and it'll harvest those credentials, and then they're going back for sale. So when you have an information stealer malware and it's got your domain and your credentials, you have to take some sort of action with that. Like, the individual needs to be alerted to that. If you can figure out who it is, they need to, make sure they can remove that malware from the device. And then you want to do things like rolling those credentials, resetting the passwords, probably also, resetting their multi-factor authentication, setting that up again. Then making sure they understand good cybersecurity practices. So things like using a password manager, using multi-factor authentication if they don't already do so, understanding those things and getting them to implement these sort of changes step by step. That will really help. And that's where we sort of talk about understanding the landscape here, right? And then the next step along this sort of chain, we talk around the systematic approach. So I'm an open source intelligence specialist, that's what I do. What does that mean? I hear you ask through the internet. Effectively it means collecting information from the public domain, and predominantly nowadays that means things on the internet, but we might also be leveraging information from books, newspapers, journals, you name it. Any kind of publicly held data is available to be researched and analysed. So what is open source intelligence? in a nutshell, we collect that publicly available information, we're able to analyze it, and we're able to infer context, and ideally produce some sort of outcome. So for a lot of cases, when it comes to cybersecurity, the outcome is I want to protect the business. I've identified this information over here from my knowledge, my understanding, and of the business of both the adversary, that's information I've found, the business that I'm trying to protect. I can infer that this threat over here is a threat to this business. This is why. These are the actions we need to take. Fairly rudimentary, but that's kind of where the intelligence part comes in. And a lot of businesses are slowly moving towards an intelligence-led cybersecurity practice, which is a really great move. And what that means really is we're taking the intelligence first and foremost, and then we're taking actions to protect our business based off of that information. So rather than doing things as a whole, rather than doing things sort of carte blanche, we are worried about this type of adversary because we're just a large company. We're doing things a bit more tailored and a bit more specific. So let's look at this company. Let's understand what's actually relevant to us. And that's where I think attack surface intelligence comes in. The whole purpose of attack surface intelligence, as far as I'm concerned, and how we're delivering this at Perspective Intelligence, is based around this. Let's look at things that are relevant to your business, and then let's take the information that we can find, and let's understand how an adversary may use that against you. And the premise of this whole thing being, if we can protect the outside, if we can make the outside a really hard shell to crack, then on the inside, where things should already be, hopefully, relatively well understood or well implemented, you're going to be much harder to infiltrate. And when it comes to cybersecurity, as hard as it is to say, it's all about making yourself a very hard target for somebody to infiltrate, so they move on to somebody else. And then that way you get to protect your customers, and ultimately you get to protect your business. And then you can even think about that as an individual. Like, if you can make yourself very hard to compromise, so by using a password manager, multi-factor authentication, all those things, a cyber criminal who tries to target you with a phishing email, and even if you fall for that initial phishing email and you kind of twig, they'll drop that and move on to somebody that's more gullible, easier to target, easier to defraud. That's what it always comes down to, really. For most, I would say 99% of individuals and businesses, the threat here is financially motivated crime, predominantly, rather than it is about, nation-state espionage. And that's the kind of systematic approach that we're taking at Perspective Intelligence. I touched on intelligence analysis as well with that, and what I mean. So we're taking all that data, we're analysing it, we're inferring the context, and then we're going to produce a report which has outcomes that we need to see in order to try and mitigate or remediate against a specific threat. So in terms of solutions, which the next point, that includes things like doing dark web reconnaissance. Both a combination of automatic and manual research is how we do it. We're doing continuous monitoring, using that risk-based prioritization. So when something comes up and it looks like a particularly large threat, that's when we actively engage. When things come up that look a bit more lower risk, maybe we do a bit more information gathering, maybe we take some actions. It's always about making sure we're prioritizing the highest threats and taking those actions to eliminate those. Ideally, when you work with us, or when we contact you and say something needs doing, it's because it needs doing. Other small things, other matters, we'll either try and handle it ourselves, like submit takedown requests, things like that, or we will, inform you at the end of the month in a formal report and say we also identified these things which need action, but then obviously not going to be a priority. So the benefit of that is that it gives you and your business a well-rounded understanding, right? So if we take things such as vulnerabilities, if we can identify software vulnerabilities from outside of the network, then you probably need to take some sort of steps to safeguard those applications. If I can detect the software versions, is there anything you can do to remove that? So it's not so easy to identify what's vulnerable. If there's misconfigurations, if I can identify data and access data on things like Amazon S3 buckets or Microsoft Azure blobs, that's a problem, right? Something needs to change. If that data isn't meant to be publicly accessible, something's wrong in the configurations. Can you take some changes, and can we support you to help remediate that? If we find that data, or we find vulnerabilities and misconfigurations, maybe it's something that you might want to consider getting a penetration test done, and so on and so forth. So when we talk about sort of doing that piece and identifying the whole external attack surface, we're looking for your technology assets. We're looking for the entry and exit points. So, if I can find web servers, email servers, VPN endpoints, things like that, those are things that criminals are going to target. They're going to be looking for things that might be vulnerable or that might be misconfigured. And we very often see a lot of companies, I'm not going to name names, but companies that provide those sorts of appliances having serious vulnerabilities on an almost bi-monthly basis, it feels like at times. So being aware of those pieces of software and being able to update and remediate these threats is really, really important to preventing those initial access points into your network. So if I move on a little bit, one of the companies we've partnered with to help us deliver attack surface intelligence is a company called Dark Invader. They have a web portal which helps us provide some of this automated discovery and sort of mapping process. I find it's a really useful platform. It gives me a lot of great data points I think a lot of other attack surface products may miss, such as brand impersonation, either for fraudulent purposes or for phishing campaigns. If you can identify your logos in use, if you can find, domains that look very, very similar to your own that you don't own, and suddenly there's content on them. It's things like that where we need to make changes. Maybe you need to submit takedown requests. Maybe you need to be a bit more resilient. Maybe we can block those domains from sending your company emails that are more targeted. So little things like that. Using this automation piece, that's where that comes in really helpfully. Dark Invader also does some dark web reconnaissance as well, so we can look for things like names, document titles, specific URLs, individuals, and they can also support us with doing monitoring for individuals as well. So that's a really important part as well. So where you have publicly facing members of staff, think of people like in the board, people that control invoicing payments, things like that, people who would be a really attractive target for a criminal group, those are the people we want to be protecting. So if we can monitor personal email addresses, phone numbers, and other little details to try and prevent them from being targeted, as soon as we see it, we can take remediative action and make sure that they're aware and they can take steps to implement better security practices. The other thing we get to do there is also look at vulnerability identification. So the Dark Invader portal allows us to run external vulnerability scans of a network. So you provide us the domains, the IP addresses that you care about. We can get those scans done from the outside, and then we can effectively give you that report which says, this is what it looks like from the outside. What's beyond the outside and inside your own networks, you deal with that. We're only looking from the outside. We're never going to look to get into your networks. We're never going to do anything that's particularly invasive. We're all about doing external, non-invasive means. We're looking at your business the same way a criminal would, and we're looking for those entry points that we think are probably the weakest. And then if we can find those points, and they are indeed weak, that's where we support you to make those changes. So thinking about the actual best practices for managing this, so in this, as you can see, this blog post is quite long. To try and summarize, we really think it's a combination of things, right? So we're going to leverage the tooling that we have available. We're going to look for those exposures, and then we're going to prioritize any exposures that we deem to be a particular risk. We're going to continue to monitor the dark web. The dark web is a very broad coverall term, but I think people kind of understand what it means. So it's not just about the dark web. We'll also look on criminal underground forums, we'll look on Telegram, we'll look on Discord, we'll look across the whole range of platforms and services, effectively looking for those darker corners of the internet that cyber criminals are active on. And then with that, we get to provide you that proactive advice. So we find these things, these are the actions you should take. Integrating sort of real life threat intelligence for your business. If we can find that you're vulnerable to CVE, whatever, in 3 or 4 different parts of your network, please go patch that, because maybe that one's being exploited. And if we know that that's a vulnerability is being actively exploited by criminals, you can take some actions to fix it. We can provide this as like an ongoing service as well, so we can do this on a regular basis to suit your own cadence. Some customers prefer just a one-off report, and then maybe they'll come back in a year and say, can you do it again? Which is completely fine. I think maybe a year is maybe too long. If maybe a month might be too much for some organizations, particularly if they're not that large. But I feel like a 6 monthly cadence, if you want to do it on a one-off basis, is great. When you work with us, we'll give you access to Dark Invader for a 12-month period, so you can also do this, a large part of what we do, sort of on your own time as well, so you can work with us. We'll monitor it, of course, and let you know when something comes up that looks particularly interesting. But if you feel like you want to log in, you want to see what other data's out there and what things are collected about your business, then you have that option. And then finally, it's all around really implementing like protective measures and controls, right? So taking what we find, implementing some changes, and then being able to, effectively verify that those changes are successful. And then sort of in conclusion around what we've done, right? What we've spoken about. But I also want to show you this image that I posted on LinkedIn fairly recently. And it's kind of like how a hacker would look at a business, and you'll see here it's kind of a lot along the same lines of what I've just talked about. I didn't really touch on social media too much, actually, thinking about that. What do I mean by social media? By and large, it's around looking on social media for posts about your company, whether that's employees sharing about new work achievements, technologies that they're working with, your business partnerships, things like that. Any information that's posted on social media that could help me understand your technology stack and potentially how I might look to exploit you. So if I can find a member of staff that works in IT and they give a very fulfilled list of technologies that they work with, that can help me understand what your network may look like on the inside, and it sort of gives a criminal head start, for want of a better phrase. Stolen credentials I would talk about all day long, and I've already did earlier in the video. But yeah, monitoring for those, understanding where they are found, the potential impact of that, and taking those steps to remove that threat, particularly in cases where BYOD or your devices are not managed very well, or everyone has local administrator rights on their device. Those are the things that we need to find. Those are the things that we need to try and remediate against or mitigate. So vulnerable software, if we can find that from the outside, you can rest assured that cyber criminals are doing the exact same thing. We need to identify the vulnerable software, and then you can put an action plan to try and get things updated and patched as soon as possible. Brand impersonation, it's kind of a difficult one for a lot of companies, I think, because trying to understand that somebody might do this is probably difficult because it is kind of weird. But if a cyber criminal can either impersonate your website and target your employees through a phishing email, or they're using your brand to try and promote fraudulent services, obviously there's a reputational risk there. Not to mention financial implications for any victims. So we need to be able to identify these potential threats and do something about it in order to prevent them from, harming your company at the end of the day. And then the final thing, the digital footprint. The digital footprint of individuals in the business that are either public facing or have roles and responsibilities that mean they're going to be a target. We have to be able to keep one step ahead. If we can monitor and we can identify potential exposures or potential risks for an individual, and we can inform them about it, and they can take steps to fix or prevent something from happening, then great. And a lot of times it's going to be very simple things. It might be membership of some questionable websites that we can easily infer from email addresses and stuff like that. It might be planning permission on houses, and the sort of information that we can find about where they live, where their children may go to school, stuff like that. Anywhere where a criminal could look to extort you for one reason or another, if we can identify these things and then help you understand how this data fits together, and then you can take a personalized action plan away, then fantastic. So, attack surface intelligence really is quite broad. I think we can agree that. This video is probably quite a bit longer than I anticipated it being. That being said, I think there's a lot of value and there's a lot of things that organizations and individuals can take away. So if you've got any questions about attack surface intelligence, if anything in this video is resonating and you think, oh God, I'd love to know a little bit more, one of the things we offer at Perspective Intelligence is a free attack surface assessment for business. Let me say that again, attack surface assessment for businesses. It's a very simple process. Send me an email. We'll sort of have a quick call, discuss your needs, discuss what you're looking to understand. I'll go away, collect some research, do some analysis, and give you like a brief outline of what I think things look like, and then maybe we can go from there. We have a range of services and products for this, and we are happy to tailor our services to work with companies depending on what they need. Intelligence requirements are really important to me, and I want to make sure that when I work with a client, they're getting what they need. They're not getting a generic carte blanche service. So at Perspective Intelligence, we always work with our clients to understand their exact needs, and we look to service those needs. So if you've got any questions, hit me up at AaronCTI on X and LinkedIn. And otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.